hardwares and whatever. Just focus on developing your infrastructure in that space. All right, good. So the next thing we're going to talk about is why cloud. What are the benefits of cloud? Why are people moving into cloud? So of course, is the agility aspect of it, which is, you're able to launch different resources literally in minutes, right? I can open up an AWS account right now and start building. The other benefit is the elasticity, which is allows you to auto scale and meet on demand. It allows us to be able to run our infrastructure and scale our infrastructure on demand. Global reach. So one thing about AWS, or one thing about the cloud benefits, is the fact that it allows us to deploy our infrastructure closer to the customers that we serve. And of course, that could be anywhere around the globe. Cost optimization. So you pay for only the resources that you need, right? Those are some of the key benefits of moving your resources into cloud. And finally, managed services. It reduce on the differentiated heavy lifting, right? So which is a good solution when it comes to building infrastructure. Now, anything that comes to benefits always have their challenges and of course their shared responsibilities. So one of the core responsibility is security, right? So let's look at security in the sense that of course, when it comes to AWS, AWS have a secure, it's responsible for securing the cloud. And of course, you are responsible for securing what you run in it. We're going to go into details if you decide to take my class. I'm more than happy to really break this down into details, right? So governance and cost control, which also needs to be guardrailed. There's a lot of skill gap because one thing about AWS is they do introduce new services and new patterns and new solutions on a daily basis. So it's very difficult for you to be able to find someone that has the skill to be able to master that environment because of all the constant changes in the new services that have been developed by any of these cloud service providers. Governance and cost controls. Skills gap, design for resilience and failure, and so on and so forth. So those are the key, challenges, and of course, that we face when it comes to running resources in the cloud space. So let's talk about service models. So when it comes to service models, to me, these are the promises that every cloud service provider promises anyone that wants to run their operations in the cloud space. So of course, service models are broken down into 4 different sets. One is, infrastructure as code, platform as code, infrastructure as service, platform as service, software as service. Then of course we have the serverless function, which is part of the service model at the moment. Now let's take a look at the deployment models. So deployment models is broken down into 4 different models, right? One is, of course, the public cloud, which is multi-tenant but isolated per account, meaning everyone can just, go into the AWS space and set up an account, and of course, automatically you are running your operation in a public cloud. Followed by a private cloud model, which is on-premise or dedicated environment. That's when you start running virtualizations, but that is done in the on-prem data center side. Then we have a hybrid model. An hybrid model is a key deployment model that allows organizations to be able to utilize their existing data center and add that to AWS, but running connection in between to serve as if they are in the same network, right? So again, when you have an hybrid environment, it means a combination of application running in AWS or any other cloud service providers, plus some application running in a data center, right? This is mainly used for large organizations. Then we have a multi-cloud. So there are some companies that sees some advantages of running some the applications across multiple cloud environments. So you might have some workload in Azure, some workload in OCI, a few workload in AWS. So you might come across certain things like that. So let's move on. So global infrastructure, what exactly is that? So when it comes to global infrastructure is, hey, where is AWS located across the globe, right? What is the global presence of AWS across the globe? Now, all these things are broken down into certain categories. Now, there are more detailed information about this, but one thing I want you guys to take away from here is, of course, there's something called region. Region is just a geographical area, across the world where these data centers are placed, followed by an availability zone. An availability zone is the real data center, right? And when it comes to a cloud service provider like AWS, they have these availability zones, spans within a region, and it could be three, it could be four. For instance, in North Virginia is 6 availability zones, and each of these data centers physically are approximately about 50 miles apart from each other, right? So, which is a very good sense of how broad the AWS global presence, or any of these cloud service providers global presence is. Then we have an edge location, which is mainly used for CloudFront point of presence for low latency delivery. There's a lot more information about edge locations. Edge locations are just very similar to availability zones, but of course they're not really a data center. They're only used for storing images and videos, or maybe a copy. We call it cached items, right? They are stored there, right? I mean, it's a lot more detail on this, but of course, we're going to talk more about that as time goes on. One thing about global infrastructures, your main goal is just to focus on, okay, well, which region am I going to be serving, right? Where are my main customers based? So let's say, for instance, you are a startup company, and majority of your customers are in India, right? Let's say 80% of your customers are in India, right? Of course, when choosing where to deploy your application, you want to choose a region in the Mumbai area in India, and you start creating your servers there, creating your database there, setting up your network there, right? So it's easier for people to actually connect to your servers, right? I know this is very broad, high level, but of course, just give an idea. So choosing the right region based on latency, compliance, and of course, services. Okay, that's part of the global infrastructure of AWS. Now, let's talk about AWS account and IAM basics. So accounts, security or isolations, boundaries. You can use multiple accounts for staging on prod. So what does that really mean? So you have the ability to be able to actually have multiple accounts across, in AWS or Azure. And you can isolate those accounts based on the workload, right? So again, you might have an account that's mainly used for production, customer facing applications. And you might have another account whereby you and your team or the company doing your testing and staging for, right? And of course, you really want to make sure that those accounts have their isolated boundaries. Then, of course, IAM users. So we're going to talk more about this whole topic about IAM users, roles, policy, and understanding the principled list of list privilege and access control, right? Followed by AWS organizations, where you can centralize billing and, of course, have different guardrails based on service control protocol, right? SCPs. Followed by, of course, identity federation, using SSO with IDP, which is single sign-on. So now let's talk about networking, which is pretty much the premier of AWS. You cannot be an AWS solutions architect without understanding a VPC. Then, of course, there are different components of a VPC. VPC is the virtual private cloud, which is created within a specific region. So once you open your account, you really want to make sure you figure out which region you want to use. Then from there you start figuring out, okay, what VPC, what network do I want to build within this region? And within that, you're going to have to worry about subnets, which is the subnetwork of your, remember, your VPC is your network and the subnet is your subnetwork. And within the subnets, there is you have the option of choosing the public and the private. And of course, you also have to route those traffic internally or externally. So of course, we have to look into routing, route tables, internet or NAT gateway, and some of those services within the VPC, followed by security. How do you secure your network? So there are two different aspects when it comes to securing your network. One is through a security group and the other one is through a NACOs, which, for security group is stateful, meaning whatever traffic that's allowed inbound by default, it will leave the VPC. Whereas when it comes to NACO, it's stateless in nature. So you have to be very, very careful on how you configure your routing when it comes to the NACOs. Then of course, AWS or any other cloud service provider provide compute options, right? When it comes to compute, there's, of course, Amazon EC2, which is a very flexible VMs with various instance families, followed by auto scaling, which is mainly for like elastic load balancer for elasticity. Then there's containers, solutions out there. Then when it comes to container solutions within AWS, you have the Amazon ECS, you have the Fargate, you have the EKS. Now, Amazon Elastic Container Services is a managed, containerized solution in AWS. It's really mainly used for orchestrating your containers, right? Amazon EKS that came after, ECS, which is a very good solution for enterprise level containerized application right now. And within that, you can choose without anyone you choose, either the ECS or the EKS. You can determine if you want to utilize an EC2 instance as your node or Fargate. There's a lot more to talk about that. That's a whole chapter on its own. And of course, as far as compute options, there is serverless, which is mainly like AWS Lambda for event-driven workloads. If you want to automate certain things in AWS, that's a service that you probably need to look into. Storage services within AWS. So, of course, one of the main ones, which is the first initial storage solution in AWS, is what we call the object storage, Amazon S3, right? And it's durable and it's scalable, right? It's a, AWS managed solution that can allow you to store object-based storage in it, right? There's a lot of solution there that you could use, S3 for. Then we have Amazon EBS, which is mainly for like block storage. And this is attached to EC2 instance. So pretty much this is an attachment to your server. And of course, there's a snapshot and all that you can take from that as well. And there's something called Amazon EFS. EFS stands for Elastic File Service, right? Or system, matter of fact. Of course, that's managed NFS file storage, followed by S3 Glacier. Is mainly used for archiver, tiers for cost optimization. So if you have some long-term, store, data that you want to store that you're not going to be accessing frequently, then the option would be S3 Glacier, which is mainly used for archiver tier storage. Now, as part of AWS services, there are database services and of course analytical services, right? The most common, database services that you're probably going to come across will be the relational, databases, right? And here are the two relational databases that are currently available within AWS, and these are Amazon RDS or Aurora. And these two services are running in multiple database engine, right? So it could be MySQL, Postgre, MS SQL, and so on and so forth, right? So these are all relational database, right? Then we have what we call a NoSQL. Those are the non-relational databases within AWS. So the only one that we have that we know of is the Amazon DynamoDB, right? Which is mainly focused on key value store and documents, right? Use cases for this would be, your data that's been collected from your ring recordings. It could be, data that are not structured, right? Whatever, right? But of course, this thing needs to be stored somewhere. Then for analytical services, there are quite a few of them, but the most common one out there will be the Amazon Redshift, which is really used for data warehousing, followed by query and lakes, solutions. So there's something like Amazon Athena, AWS Glue, AWS Lake Formation. So it's a lot more. So when it comes to security and observability of your environment, there is an IAM plus AWS KMS for identity and encryption, right? So we can also look into logging or monitoring. So when it comes to logging and monitoring, AWS CloudWatch is really good for that, for mainly monitoring. For logging, user activities within your account, you can definitely look into AWS Cloud Trail and AWS Config as well. For threat detections this is still part of observability and security in AWS. We can definitely look into, Amazon Guard Duty, AWS Security Hub. Then for edge protection, you can look at AWS WAF and of course, AWS Shield. Now, when it comes to application integration, for SQS, we can look at for queuing messages, right? For help queue for decoupling messages. Then you can look into Amazon SQS followed by Amazon SNS. This is mainly used for publishing and subscribing notifications. So anything that has to do with notification integration with your application, if there's any notification that needs to be sent out to your end user, to your internal users about any changes in your environment, you probably want to look at the solutions to help you give you an insight about, what can be done in AWS. Then, of course, there's an event bridge. I normally use event bridge mainly for my automation work. This is what triggers my Lambda functions to do certain things based on the time that I set. So there's something called cron job, right? So I set up a cron job for my automation to be able to automate a process and send me notification about any change, or just not notification, mainly just trigger an event for me, right? Then we're going to talk about Amazon API Gateway, which is AWS at its own managed API, so service, which is responsible for, accepting whatever request and delivering and giving it back to you, right? So API Gateway is a very good solution that can help you accomplish that. Then, of course, edge location and content delivery. I think I mentioned this earlier through the edge location. So we have the Amazon CloudWatch, which is mainly for global CDN for static and dynamic content. So if you have some static content, some dynamic content that are cached, that needs to be cached somewhere closer to your end users, then you probably want to implement CloudFront, right? AWS Global Accelerator, that's also very good Anycast IP for performance. Then we have the Amazon Route 53, which is mainly used for, domain name system management, constantly checking the endpoint to ensure that, requested traffic have been delivered to the right location, right? So then we can look into routing policies, and there are different type of routing policies, a whole topic on that as well. Designing for elasticity and resilience. So one of the key things that we need to really pay attention when it comes to designing for, highly available and fault tolerance environments. One of the main things that we need to focus on is how do you strategize your app auto scaling, right? How do you auto scale it? Then are you also implementing a multi-deployment survivor AZ failure, right? So are you setting up, your application and spanning your application across multiple AZ? So that means, are you making sure your application or your data or your server is in two separate availability zones, right? That's pretty much what that means, right? So there's a lot more to do when it comes to that. Do you have any backups? Do you have any disaster recovery strategy in place? Are they warm standby in place? Do you have what we call a blue-green deployment, right? So also another thing you need to really focus on when it comes to Designing a resilient environment. Most cases now we have to start looking into infrastructure as code with Terraform or CloudFormation. So in case something breaks, easily quickly revive them by just rerunning your code, right? So that's another thing that we need to talk about. A well-architected framework. What does that really mean? When it comes to AWS, there's a pillars, right? Operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, cost, and sustainability, right? These are the areas that we really need to focus. These are the core, pillars of AWS. Is how do you set up a well-architected framework, right? Covers these main components, right? Cover these components: operational excellence, right? Security, reliability, performance, cost, and sustainability. So cost is actually very important because the reason why people move into the cloud space is because they want to save cost, right? But if you don't know what you're doing, you might end up spending more, right? So understanding how to maximize your environment, knowing how to implement certain solution to reduce cost, right? It could be something from resizing of your servers. It could be something like implementing auto scaling. It could be something like maybe just don't have all different services running that are not functional in your environment, like constant cleanup of your EBS volume that are not currently attached to your server. So there's so many different things to look into when it comes to designing a well-architected framework in AWS. Then, of course, use Lens to review identity risk. So that's on the security side now, right? Then, of course, iterate continuous as architecture involves. So always look at your architecture, look at your environment, the way it's set up, and constantly look at solution to help revive that. All right, so how do you get started with AWS? Actually, it's a very simple process. All you need to do is just, if you have a credit card or a debit card, log into AWS account and set it up. It's like you're filling up a very simple, form and creating an AWS account. It's a very simple process. But once you've created your account, you need to start looking into how do you secure your account. So definitely enable MFA and of course have a strong IAM guardrails in place. All right. Another good thing is also make sure that you can set AWS budgets and of course cost anomaly detections, right? So in my class, I show you all this stuff. We go into details on how to set this up. Use a free tier to explore core services. Normally, AWS give you a 1 year free tier option. Use all the free tier options just for you to explore and play with all these different services in AWS. Install and configure AWS CLI and SDK. So that's one of the things that we cover in our class. So AWS CLI is AWS command line interface. Normally what we do is we install Ubuntu. If you're a Windows user, Ubuntu subsystems, Windows subsystems. For Linux, we install it on our computer and you can install the AWS CLI in there. If you're a Mac OS user, then you can just use a terminal and install AWS CLI. With that, you should be able to make a programmatic call directly from your computer to your AWS account, right? So hands-on demo ideas, right? There's a whole bunch of different things that we're going to talk about in my class, from hosting a static website using S3 bucket to exposing a simple API with API gateway and Lambda, persist submission of DynamoDB, automates with Terraform modules. So there's so many things that we're going to talk about. Governance and operations. So multi-account strategies with AWS organizations, service control policies, which is SCP. That's how you set up different guardrails within your account. Centralized logging and monitoring and incident response. Backup, lifecycle, patch management. This is how you make sure that you have your operations and governance and everything in place. Here are some of the certifications that you need to know and learning path, right? Definitely for beginner, I would suggest you start with AWS, Cloud Practitioner certification, followed by the association, solutions architect or developer associate or 6 ops, right? Then you can go into the professional level. Then, of course, practice, practice, and practice. There's a lot of different areas you can go to and learn about AWS. So there are tons of documentation out there. Well architectural labs out there within the AWS documentation. Well architected lab, I'm sorry. Then, of course, it's a free tier and pricing calculator which you can use. Yep, that's pretty much it. If you have any question, leave your comment below. I'm more than happy to help you out with any question you might ask when it comes to AWS. And of course, I do offer a free one-on-one, I do offer a free one-on-one I do offer a free one-on-one meeting with anyone that wants to learn more about how you can break into the cloud space.